Many of us Republicans have a major problem with the amount of spending that's going on here in Washington, D.C. You heard Chairman Thornberry talk about the good and the bad and the ugly. The good is very good, but the bad and ugly is very bad and ugly as well. We've got to do a better job. We can't leave this kind of deficit close to $1 trillion this year, and that's a problem for many of us.
Yeah, $1.3 trillion. I mean, how do you address that when we just heard one of your fellow colleagues talk about a $21 trillion debt that we're leaving to our children and grandchildren?
Yeah, it's very concerning for many of us here, because even if you look at the first several years of the Obama administration, you had deficits of 35% and 40%. The last three was 15%, 12%, and 14% respectively. We're looking at something close to 17% this year, 21% next year. The defense funding needs to go up. I get that. I've stood in the empty missile silos, but $63 billion for non-discretionary spending is a major problem for many of us. We have to do better than that.
So what's your advice?
Well, the Speaker this morning, and if I can remember his exact quote, once we get through this moment, we're going to be looking at entitlement reform. Specifically, he mentioned welfare reform. Representative John Ratcliffe and I just released an op-ed on a balanced budget amendment. Washington must be more fiscal responsible, or it's not only about politically, it's not only about elections, it's about doing what's best for the next generation.
So when you're dealing with the wall, the $1.6 billion, I mean, is that too much? Should that be pared down? What would you suggest concretely, specifically, to do with that?
Not at all. I mean, that is something that strictly is tied to our defense. We've seen the gang violence. We appreciate the president, the administration cracking down on some of those. Human trafficking is another issue. We must secure our borders. We've seen the sanctuary city issue without getting in the details of that. We've got to do a better job at that. But there are non-discretionary defense items that we can curve back. We've got to take a look at entitlement reform. I know the president has talked about sometimes not touching some of these entitlements, but a third of the budget is strictly entitlements. We've got to take a look at that, and we've got to bring a sharp pencil. Social Security won't even be solvent in the next decade or so if we do not handle some of these items.
Well, we just saw Connor Lamb, the Democrat, he's ahead. The counting is continuing. And during his campaign, and you expect moderate Democrats will hammer away on this, no touching the Social Security, Medicare, or any of those entitlements. So what would you suggest to the folks on the other side of the aisle?
I think it's a false argument. If we don't touch it, if we don't deal with it, it will not exist in 12 years. I'm 48. By the time I'm 60, it won't exist. More importantly, for my children and grandchildren, if we do not have something in place, what kind of legacy is that leaving? And Republicans have both houses. They also have the administration. It's time to bend this bell curve. It can't happen overnight. I get it. But we must show some true discipline. We have to be the adults in the room. We have funding requests by the billions every single week, Republicans and Democrats. But someone has to step up. Republicans have to step up to be able to bend this back.
And finally, in terms of Friday, you expect a deal so the government keep going?
We do. Listen, give me a shout out to the leadership is pulling this as far to the right as possible. They did a great job. Appropriators worked all night to hold the high language to make sure those pro-life provisions are not affected. The Senate kind of had backed up on that. We appreciate those guys doing that. It's trending in the right direction, but we need more.
Congressman Mark Walker of North Carolina. Better get back in that room, get to work. We'll see you reporting what you're doing.